a variety of other.
And I don't disagree that you may have, it looks like I've expired the time. We'll come back. If we get another opportunity to speak, maybe we'll do some more, but my time's up, or the gentleman's time up. At the gentleman's time having expired, I now recognize Ms. Clark of New York for 5 minutes of question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and thank you to our panelists today. Mr. Chairman, I've heard oftentimes, particularly when dealing with this subject matter of left-wing organized violence, a lot of time spent on talking about violence that has caused damage to property. But colleagues seem to be omitting certain examples. So I want to make sure that we correct the record. Here we have an example, and this is the aftermath of the Oklahoma City bombing. That is some serious property damage. As a matter of fact, it's $652 million worth, in fact. The Oklahoma City bombing was famously a right-wing attack against the federal government, which may be why my colleagues don't talk about it. Though, to be honest, I care much less about property than I do about human lives. Tragically, the Oklahoma City bombing was also incredibly lethal, killing approximately 168 people and injuring an additional 680, making it the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in United States history. I highlight this to show that right-wing movements in this country have a long history of violence, a long history of being more violent than left-wing movements, but this is nothing new. What is new, though, is the extent to which the Republican Party has enhanced and embraced and encouraged violence, especially under the extreme MAGA cult of Donald Trump. Let's talk about what has happened to the GOP over the past several years. In 2015 and 2016, throughout his campaign for president, Donald Trump encouraged violence against protesters at his rallies, saying protesters should be roughed up and that his supporters should, quote, knock the hell out of them. He said attacks on protesters were, quote, very, very appropriate and something that, quote, we need to do a little bit more of. Republicans had plenty of opportunity and time to recognize what kind of politician Donald Trump was, and they fell in line to support him. After Trump was elected, right-wing violence went from bad to worse. Here, we all know this photo. This is the photo from the Unite the Right rally held in 2017, during which a self-identified white supremacist rammed his car into a group of counter-protesters, killing one person and injuring dozens of others. Some might call that a domestic terrorist attack. In fact, the driver pled guilty to 29 federal hate crimes. And Ms. Stefanik helped hold the rally's planners liable for planning a violent attack. And I want to thank you for your hard work and dedication to our nation. At this time, President Trump said in the aftermath of the rally that there were very fine people on both sides of the rally, which encouraged white nationals. Here's a photo of Portland, Oregon in 2020. My Republican colleagues have highlighted property damage resulting from these protests, but to me, the most troubling aspect of these protests was that Trump's Department of Homeland Security confirmed that police without identification were using unmarked vehicles to arrest protesters. Unidentified federal police were kidnapping protesters in unmarked vehicles. And the Trump administration's actions in responding to these protests encouraged vigilante justice, chaos, and violence, not law and order. While in office, Trump also did the following to encourage violence: labeled the news media, quote, the enemy of the people, encouraged police officers to be tough with people they arrest, encouraged the shooting of looters, praised law enforcement for an extrajudicial killing, and told the Proud Boys, a group so vile as to have been labeled a terrorist entity in Canada, to stand back and stand by, galvanizing the group, according to their own words, in helping to instigate planning for January 6th. That brings us to one of the darkest days in American history, the failed insurrection of January 6th.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
All right, but we have many
I
examples,
recognize
Mr. Chairman.
Mr.
I yield
Crane
back.
of Arizona for his 5 minutes of question.
Thank you guys for coming today. I appreciate you guys being here on Police Week. Mr. Erickson, the lady sitting to your left, Miss Stefanik, stated on Twitter that white supremacism is the most dangerous terror threat. Do you agree or disagree with that statement?
I think, again, it depends on what context you're looking at. Globally, I would probably disagree with that.
Well, just look at what she tweeted. Is the most dangerous terrorist threat. What do you think about that?
I would probably disagree with that.
Why is that, Mr. Erickson?
Because the global view of threats that we face in this country is much larger than the domestic extremism that we're talking about today. And I think that's a completely different hearing, a completely different topic to have. But I think we tend to get myopia when we start talking about specific things and we start talking in hyperbole. That's what I would describe.
Yeah, you're right. We do that a lot around here. That seems like that's one of the predominant themes in this chamber, which is ironic for some of us that have actually been around the world chasing down real terrorists. Mr. Rojas, what do you think about that? What do you think about that tweet from Ms. Stefanik? White supremacism is the most dangerous terror threat. What do you think about that?
Well, I would agree with Mr. Erickson if we're talking about, globally, there's a lot of bad people out there that want to hurt us. And I would also just say that, like, here in the district, I would, just walking down on the street, with homicides being up 7% and along with other crimes being up, I wouldn't be stabbed or carjacked or shot statistically, by a white guy in a red hat screaming, "This is MAGA country."
Yeah, no, exactly. And we all know that's the case. I mean, it's not the reason you can't walk down the street in Chicago, New York, Baltimore, et cetera, because of white supremacy. And it's just sad because here's the deal. White supremacy is disgusting. It's disgusting. I look across the aisle at some of my brothers and sisters that don't have the same skin color as me. And you know what I see? I see men and women that were created in the image of God, just like I was. You may have a little more melanin in your skin than I do. I could care less. Even though I don't agree with you politically or your political worldview, you guys are my brothers and sisters, and I think it is disgusting. That being said, you guys are playing a very dangerous game by continually overstating the threat of white supremacy when there are massive threats. It's not white supremacists that are killing tens of thousands of our children in pill form called fentanyl. It's not white supremacy that is storming over our southern border right now. It's not white supremacy that is trafficking, sex slaves into this country at record numbers, and on and on and on. But if you guys want to keep beating that drum, you're more than that. That's your right. That's your right. But it's a reason that a lot of Americans don't take you guys seriously. My brothers and sisters, it's a reason why America doesn't take you guys seriously, because you keep beating that drum. It wasn't white supremacists that flew airliners into the World Trade Centers. And guess what? They're still out there. And a lot of those folks, because I've actually chased a lot of them overseas, they would love to come into a room like this with an S-vest on and clack it off and kill every single one of us. Black, brown, white, they could care less, because you don't share the same religious ideology as them. So we can keep playing these games. But you guys have seen the CBP individuals in here telling you how many individuals on the terror watch list has come over that southern border. And I'm telling you, my brothers and sisters of different colors than me, of the same color as me, if we're going to get serious about homeland security, we need to stop. We need to be realistic. And yeah, I don't know a member on this side or that side that doesn't think legitimate, real white supremacy is disgusting, because it is. Any type of supremacy is disgusting. Anytime we devalue anybody or hurt them or harm them with violence because of their skin color is disgusting. Ms. Gaines, thank you so much for what you're doing. As a dad to 2 little girls, it's pretty cool to see young women like yourself that have the courage to stand up to what you face on a daily basis. I've said it many times. You know what the #1 ingredient missing in this town is, ma'am? It's not intelligence. Do you know what it is?
What is it?
It's courage.
I agree.
And you have it. Thank you. Thank you guys for showing up today.
Thank you.
The gentleman's very consequential time has expired, and I now recognize Mr. Goldman of New York for his 5 minutes of question.
Well, I really appreciate the lecture from my colleague from Arizona. The problem is that he's speaking, of course, anecdotally. So let's look at what our actual executive branch agencies in charge of overseeing white supremacy, overseeing the homeland. Let's look at the Homeland Threat Assessment, which says, among DVEs, domestic violent extremists, racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists, specifically white supremacist extremists, will remain the most persistent and lethal threat in the homeland. Confirmed by the director of the FBI. Now, I know all of a sudden you all on that side want to defund the FBI, you want to defund the ATF, but the director of the FBI, a Trump appointee, has said that the biggest threat to our homeland is not global terrorism, it is domestic terrorism. And we have these witnesses up here who are trying to tell us, and Mr. Erickson, in his opening statement, let me just point this out. This is the big example that we need to be so worried about, because in Atlanta, apparently, there were 23 individuals arrested for crimes ranging from vandalism to assault. We have 650 people who are murdered in mass shootings every single year. Almost 2 per day mass shootings. Sorry, 600 mass shootings, far more people. And we're supposed to be talking here about vandalism. Give me a break. You can't even say, you can't sit here, Mr. Erickson. You were an employee of the Department of Homeland Security, and I want to get to that in a minute. You can't even acknowledge what your own agency said, that the biggest domestic terror threat is white nationalism, white supremacy. You're trying to get us, gaslight us up here as if Antifa, which Mr. Rosas, apparently the expert now in organized terrorist activity, has overruled the FBI director who says, there's a headline, says Antifa is an ideology, not an organization. No. Let's not listen to the FBI director. Let's listen to, sorry, what's your title? Senior writer at Town Hall, who is going to tell us that the FBI director is wrong. And I'd like to introduce, there's no question. I'd like to introduce, by unanimous consent, an AP article saying the FBI director says Antifa is an ideology, not an organization.
Without objection, so ordered.
Can I respond to that?
No, you cannot. I didn't ask a question.
It's the gentleman's time. He can spend it any way he chooses.
Mr. Erickson, you went to a meeting at the White House on December 18th, 2020, did you not?
I'm not sure which meeting you're speaking of.
Well, there was the same day that a group of Trump advisors, Sidney Powell and Patrick Byrne, met with the president in the Oval Office, and they discussed the prospect of seizing voting machines. Did you participate in that meeting?
No.
Did you hear anything about that plan to seize voting machines?
No.
Okay. So were you working at the Department of Homeland Security on January 6th?
Yes, I was.
Because, you know, it's interesting to me, you talk a lot about left-wing extremist activity in your statement, but you actually worked for the Department of Homeland Security on January 6th, and there was no mention of what happened on January 6th in your testimony. And it's fair. That's not the topic of this title of this hearing. I think that's the problem with the hearing, but that's not your fault. So I just want to be clear. You have no idea. You were not involved in any discussions about seizing voting machines while you were working at the Department of Homeland Security?
That is correct.
When did you leave the department?
January the 20th, 2021 at noon.
Why did you leave then?
There was an inauguration that occurred at that time.
So a lot of people are held over, right?
No, that's incorrect. Not political appointees.
Okay, everyone was out?
Basically everybody, yeah, to the best of my knowledge.
So let me ask you something. Would you consider the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers to be an organized group?
Yes.
Their leaders have been convicted of seditious conspiracy at this point, right?
To my knowledge, correct.
Yeah, based on what they did on January 6th.
Correct.
Okay, have any left-wing, Antifa, or any other people been convicted of conspiracy?
The gentleman's time has expired. The committee will proceed.
Can you answer the question?
Well, actually, your question was outside of your time as well. So, but you
So
might
the answer is
get
no,
another-
he cannot?
We'll proceed to another round so you can get another opportunity to follow that up as you would wish.
I figured as much.
We'll proceed to a second round of questioning. I recognize myself for 5 minutes, or what portion of that I might consume. Ms. Stefanik, let me go back and give you, because I really didn't give you a full opportunity to answer, and let me just by way of reintroducing the topic, and it sort of builds off of what Mr. Crane said to some degree. But here's another tweet that you did on April 24. When reporters write the story of Tucker Carlson, do not gloss over who he is. He is a raging white supremacist, misogynist, and bigot who has done more to normalize violent extremism and hate over the last few years than nearly anyone else. I think what I'm trying to get at from you, ma'am, and you may not wish to draw such a distinction, but isn't there a distinction between the white supremacy that Mr. Crane was talking about, that the Oklahoma City bomber may have been, or I'm not even sure, I guess he was an anti-government, whether it was white supremacy, I don't recall, I don't know enough about him, but there certainly are malignant theories and groups out there, the New Zealand attacker, so forth. I'm not an encyclopedia of that, obviously, but there's a lot of that. But you seem in your political advocacy to draw an equivalence between that and sort of right-wing views, conservative views. So abortion, somebody who's pro-life is a white supremacist to you, at least judged from that tweet. If you object to Soros-funded prosecutors who have sort of overturned the way prosecutorial activity goes on, you're a white supremacist. If you are Tucker Carlson, you're a white supremacist, misogynist, bigot, et cetera. Is there a distinction, or are we talking, again, is that just the whole, are you referring to the whole right, the whole center-right range of the spectrum, ideological spectrum in the country?
Well, there's a distinction between white supremacist views and white supremacist violence. And so when we talk about views, those are precisely the views that you just cited, the tweets that you referenced. People like Tucker Carlson, elected officials, pundits, candidates, others who have normalized and mainstreamed the white supremacist views, like the Great Replacement Theory, talking about things like invasion, talking about things like a globalist effort to change our demographics, change our electorate, talking about using terms like Soros or the Rothschilds as subs for the Jewish community as part of this Great Replacement Theory, which is deeply anti-Semitic, racist, xenophobic. And so when something like that gets a home on primetime news, gets espoused by elected officials and candidates, what that does is then give license to the violent extremists, like those who marched on Charlottesville or shot up the synagogue in Pittsburgh or Chabad in Poway or the Walmart in El Paso or the supermarket in Buffalo, who in their manifestos use that very same Great Replacement Theory to justify the murder of Jewish people, black people, immigrants, and so many others.
Okay, so just to clarify, let's take anti-abortion, pro-life, someone of pro-life views. That's equivalent to white supremacy in your judgment?
There are some in the anti-abortion movement who have trafficked in white supremacist views, who have talked about things like white birth rates and the replacement of the white population and the importance of, quote, banning abortion in order to protect the white population.
So
I am not
some-
saying that everyone who opposes abortion is a white supremacist, but there are absolutely many in the anti-abortion movement who utilize white supremacy
What
to
percentage
further
of
their
it?
goals. I couldn't tell you a percentage, but historically there is a deep interconnection between the white supremacist movement and the anti-abortion movement. There's been a lot written about this as well.
You can find exceptions. I'm sure Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist, wasn't she?
She could have been. She was, I believe.
Okay, so she's-
and
she
so
was-
of course
she was
there are
pro-abortion.
exceptions to every rule, but
let me ask
that
Mr.
doesn't change the fact that there are those who use white supremacy as a means to further an anti-abortion agenda.
Mr. Rosas, let me ask you to comment on the sort of the subject matter. I don't even know if I can frame a question. It seems to me troubling. I mean, I've been in politics a few years, and so it became to pass that every person who is a conservative is referred to as a racist repeatedly. Now the term sort of evolved to white supremacy. Seems to me that is destructive for the dialogue. Do you not think so?
Well, yeah, because it seems, someone sneezes the wrong way and they're accused of white supremacy. I mean, in the most prominent example that I was personally witness to was the Kyle Rittenhouse shooting. He was immediately labeled as a white supremacist. I believe one of the members of the squad, name not coming to mind, but she said that he was a white supremacist terrorist, completely neglecting the fact that the people that he shot in self-defense were all white.
My time has nearly expired, so I'll yield back, and I will recognize the ranking member, Mr. Ivey, for his second round, 5 minutes question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to do a little housekeeping here. I've got a couple of pieces to offer for the record. I ask unanimous consent to offer these statements from the Brookings Institution, the Southern Poverty Law Center, and the Global Project Against Hate and Extremism.
Without objection, so ordered.
I'd ask to offer this joint intelligence bulletin. This is some domestic violence extremists adopt boogaloo and accelerationism concepts to justify or promote violence.
Without exception, so ordered.
And Ms. Spitalnik, I don't know if you're familiar with the boogaloo and accelerationism concepts. They were new to me, but if